Letting go of a version of the past or a version of the present that didn't actually happen makes it easier for you to take advantage of the opportunities that actually lie ahead of you. And when you keep yourself oriented toward a limitless future, it's much easier to love the imperfect life that you have now. You're listening to the Life Edit Project podcast, where busy, ambitious high achievers get the tools they need to fight perfectionism and overwhelm so they can smash their goals without all the drama. I'm your host, recovering overachiever turned professional life coach, Elizabeth Burrows. Let's get to it. Good day, good people. Welcome to episode 67 of the Life Edit Project podcast. That's right. I'm your host, Coach Elizabeth, and if you're new around here, welcome. Glad you found my cozy little corner of the interwebs here in this show. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back, fam. Glad to have you. Thank you for giving your girl another chance to drop some gems on you. I'm always excited to hop on the mic and bring you another fresh episode. And this week feels even more special because this is actually the last episode of season 2 of the show. So what does that mean? Well, one, it means I'm about to take a break from the regularly scheduled programming and head into what I like to call the post-season. So you can still expect to have something new in your podcast feed every week. New episodes are still going to drop every Wednesday because Wednesday is podcast day. But the episodes themselves that will be coming out will be a little different. For me, it means I'm not really producing full-out episodes. Everything that I put out in the postseason will be really simple, really easy for me to do, but it will still be really valuable for you. And I do the postseason thing because I still want to be in your podcast feed every week. I want to stay in touch with you, but I also need some time to downshift, especially as we head into the fall and the holiday seasons. That is just a time of year for me where my energy is best used inward and not outward. And I'm really trying to honor that with the way that I run the show and my business. And the postseason also gives me some time to figure out what I want to do with the show for the next season. So when I return with season 3, to paraphrase the great Shikari, I won't just be back, but I'll be better. So I am going to drop a little explainer episode or trailer episode to tee up the postseason with more details about what that will look like. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that here, but I got plans, I got ideas, and I do think you're going to dig it. Now, all of that sounds like a really long intro, but I promise you it's all really relevant to the actual topic that I'm covering today in this episode, because season 2 of this show didn't really go the way I planned. It didn't go the way I imagined it. It was, for all intents and purposes, an imperfect season. It started out that way and it ended that way, and there were lots of imperfections along the way. Maybe you might recall this, or if you're a new listener, you wouldn't know, but I actually pushed back the launch of season 2 from January to like late February because I just wasn't ready at the beginning of the year. And during the season, there were also some conversations with special guests that I really wanted to make happen, and some of those never came together. Now, I did end up having some guests, and I did video recordings of those episodes with special guests that I've been uploading to my YouTube channel. But I've actually been really bad about getting those video episodes uploaded to my YouTube channel in a timely manner. And while I have been extremely consistent in dropping a new episode every week here on the podcast, I've been way less consistent over on my social media accounts. And yet, with all of that in consideration, this has still been an amazing season. I love the way that this show has evolved over what has been, I think it's been 28 weeks, y'all, that I have been pumping out new episodes. And This season, I find that I have actually evolved a lot as a podcaster and as a life coach. And that's only because I've learned to love the imperfections that have been a part of my journey. And by now, you ought to know that when I learn something, when I learn a hack or a technique that helps me with my own struggle with perfectionism, because yes, your girl is still a recovering perfectionist, I don't keep that knowledge to myself. I am going to share it with you, my lovely listeners, here on the show. So, in the rest of this episode, I'll be sharing with you 3 hacks that can help you love your imperfections. Ready? Let's go. So before I tell you the keys to loving your imperfections, let me clarify what I even mean by the word imperfection, because we got to get on the same page before we keep trucking forward. So the Oxford Dictionary defines an imperfection as a fault, blemish, or undesirable feature. But that's not the most helpful description when we're coming at this from the perspective of overcoming perfectionism. When that's the goal, that dictionary definition of imperfection just isn't good enough. When you have the tendency to obsess over achieving an unattainable state of perfection, the standard definition of imperfection is just woefully inadequate. So, you know what that means? It's time for another Coach Elizabeth definition, which means you will find this in absolutely nobody's dictionary because I made it up. That also means that you might want to write this definition down so that you can come back to it and reference it later. So, according to me, Coach Elizabeth, the Coach Elizabeth definition of imperfection is an instance where the gap between expectations and reality is both obvious and undesirable. I'm going to say it again. An imperfection is an instance where the gap between expectations and reality is both obvious and undesirable. Now, there are 2 things that I want you to notice in this definition. First, there is an inherent level of discomfort. And I think that's appropriate because confronting your own imperfections can be very uncomfortable, especially if you are a perfectionist or a recovering perfectionist. But the other thing that I hope you notice is that the overall definition that I have offered you doesn't have to mean that an imperfection is inherently bad or wrong. It's undesirable, but undesirable just means that it's not something that you wanted. But that right there, the state of undesirability, that's exactly where the process of learning to love your imperfections begins. And it starts with the first hack that I have to share with you, which is this. Number 1, cultivate the desire for what you have. One of the quickest and simplest ways to make an imperfection less imperfect is to make it more desirable. And one way to do that is to increase your desire, is to actually desire the thing more. If you find yourself in an imperfect situation, it will feel less imperfect if you just decide that you actively want that thing more. This podcast episode is actually a great example of this principle in action. I originally had a totally different concept planned for this episode. It involved a special guest, and we just weren't able to coordinate well enough to record the conversation that I had in mind. So it didn't happen. So then I went to plan B, and I was going to bring on another guest, actually an entrepreneur friend of mine, who was going to help me do like a season wrap-up episode, similar to what I did at the end of season 1. But then I shifted my plans, I shifted my calendar for these episodes, and I decided to extend the season through the end of August. And so that wrap-up didn't happen. And so now here I am with what is essentially plan C. I'm ending the season with this solo episode. It's just me, myself, and I. But guess what? I decided that I was really excited to talk about this topic, kind of the blessings of imperfections, and that this would actually be a great perspective to add to all of the other conversations that I've had about perfection and perfectionism on this show in season 2. So I just decided that I wanted to go this route. And now this imperfect podcast topic is less imperfect. Now, this hack is also super useful in other situations, especially a lot of longer term situations that you might find in your life, like jobs or even something like family relationships, right? Those things are gonna be imperfect. There's always gonna be a gap between what you expect and what actually happens. But you don't have to wallow in dissatisfaction when you don't get what you want, because we don't always know what we want in advance. And sometimes the thing you end up getting is something you won't know that you want until it's right in front of you. And sometimes imperfections are like that. You don't know you want them until you already have them. The second hack that I want to offer you to help you love your imperfections is to let go of the alternate reality that never actually existed. So many people get hung up on the imperfections in their life because they imagine that the thing that didn't happen would have been perfect. If I had just married that one that got away, or if I had just responded to that email this way instead, or if that person would have listened to me, things would have worked out differently. But the problem with that type of thinking is that none of that is the truth. Sure, you can acknowledge whatever option you passed up when you made a certain choice, but you can't actually know how that choice would have played out. And convincing yourself that you do makes it harder to love the imperfections that exist in your current situation. And let me also say this. This right here is not me telling you to give up on the future and potential possibilities. Letting go of a version of the past or a version of the present that didn't actually happen makes it easier for you to take advantage of the opportunities that actually lie ahead of you. And when you keep yourself oriented toward a limitless future, it's much easier to love the imperfect life that you have now, because then you're not blaming the imperfections for an undesirable future that hasn't yet happened. So let go of the perfect thing that doesn't actually exist and never did. It didn't happen. Okay, and the third and final hack that I have for you today is this. Celebrate your unexpected growth. The thing about imperfections is that you don't get to opt out of them. So if you're successful in anything, you will have created that success in the face of imperfection. Anytime you end up getting what you actually want in life, a detour was involved somewhere along the way. At some point, you expected things to happen one way and they went another way. And you had to adapt to that deviation in order to stay on track. That's what happens when you grow. That is what growth looks like. Adapting to the unexpected requires you to grow. That's where creativity and innovation happen. It's where skills are sharpened and it's where insight is gained. Imperfections are a necessary condition of our environment if we're going to grow and evolve. And when you can view the imperfections in your life through this lens, loving those imperfections is much easier. If you are a recovering perfectionist that wants to learn how to love your imperfections instead of needing to eliminate them, sign up for my one-on-one coaching program. The link to book a call with me to get started is right there in the show notes, so help is just a few clicks away, and I cannot wait to start working with you. Okay, that's all for this episode, and that's all for season 2 of the Life Edit Project podcast. Thanks for rocking with me. I really appreciate it. I will be back in your ears next week with the start of the postseason. It'll be different, but it'll still be worth it. So stay tuned. Until then, peace. Hey, thanks for tuning into this week's episode. If you have a question or a favorite insight from today's conversation, I would love to hear from you. Send me a message on social media. I'm in all the places. My handle is @LifeEditProject, all one word. And of course, my accounts are linked up in the show notes to make it easy for you, so holla at your girl. I'll be back in your ears next week with a fresh episode. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Life Edit Project podcast wherever you like to listen so that you don't miss a thing. Until then, peace.